I'm Vijay Vaitiswaran, China Business and Finance Editor for The Economist and Chairman of the Ideas Economy event series. You're about to see one of the highlights from our 2013 Ideas Economy Innovation Forum Working Group sessions. I hope you enjoy it. Tell us what you think at #IdeasEconomy. The topic is intelligent infrastructure. We're very grateful to Itron, our sponsor for this session. And our panelists are Timothy Papandreou, who's Deputy Director for Sustainable Streets at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. To his immediate right, we have Lyndon Rive, who's Chief Executive of Solar City. And at the far right, we have Russ Vanos, who's Senior Vice President, Strategy and Business Development at Itron. So thank you to my panelists. Every city these days likes to say that it's a smart city. You know, when I was getting ready for this session, thinking about all of the claims of smart cities, and especially I live in Asia, I live in Shanghai, which also is a smart city, and so is Stockholm, but so is Singapore. Every city claims to be a smart city. San Francisco claims to be a smart city. And are all these cities really the smart cities that they think they are? Or are we still some ways from getting there?
I think the question that we have is, what makes a smart city? What are we measuring when we're looking at the smart cities? And if we're measuring things on terms of people's livelihoods, the quality of life, and the access to services, et cetera, then that gives you a whole set of smart cities. If we're measuring cities on their energy use and consumption and their reduction and improvement of efficiency, you've got a whole new set of cities that are measuring. When you throw all those together, I don't think anybody's got that right yet. But I think for me, the definition of smart is people who are trying to solve those and trying to crack those nuts that are really difficult. And I think what San Francisco does really well is it understands the problem at hand, and it's really trying to work from multifacets to figure it out. And I think that's what's
Give an example of one area where you think the city does well, where you are smart.
Yeah, that's, again, very loaded question.
I don't know what you mean. It's a very innocent question.
Yeah, I think what they do really well is they share information and they communicate with each other very, very, very loudly.
When you say they, who are these people?
The citizens of San Francisco. Okay. So I'd say, we have 800,000 residents, but we also have 800,000 advocates, 800,000 experts, 800,000 everything. Right. So the level of engagement is pretty good from that perspective. I think also on the innovation of startups and just small businesses, it's a real small business enterprise city. I think we have like 1,500 startups right now. If you go to Improve SF's website, you will literally have linked all the startups, all the VC firms, and all the other pieces of it on a map, and you can see them, and they just keep multiplying like a popcorn. So you see that happening there. So again, sharing information, bring that in a way that makes sense. That's what San Francisco does really well.
It puts in my mind a question about, what is a smart city? Because you talked about people, for example, right. And in some ways the software side of things, right. How people connect. Other people talk about the hardware. Right. Other people used to be our environment and energy editor at The Economist for many, many years. When the folks in that camp talk about smart cities, they really mean sustainable cities. Absolutely. And that's the top metric for them. And the other stuff, whether people are engaged or not, as long as, we get our carbon footprint down, sure, they can be engaged. And they wouldn't say this publicly, but that's what they really think. Right. That this is the most important thing. So I wonder if this has become a catch-all phrase for lots of different meanings.
Yeah, I think when I was starting out in my schooling, we were talking about sustainable cities. And then before that, we were talking about smart growth. And, we were talking about efficient cities. And so we just keep changing the word, but it's about integration, better use of resources, better connectivity in all levels, and then, at the end of the day, economic competitiveness, because that's what separates us from everybody else to get investment.
Let me turn to Russ for a moment, because what your company does is really think about how to integrate these things, what the Brits in the room would call joined-up thinking. Can you give us a sense of, what this idea of smart cities, and again, the broader rubric, it's not only cities, we can start with that, but intelligent infrastructure.
To me, smart cities is about everything being connected, and it's communities, right? We talk cities, but it's really communities, and communities are people. And so we're all trying to strive to have a richer life, and we're all trying to strive to leave the world in a better place for the next generation. In my case, I've become real passionate on it the last 5 years because I got a 5-year-old granddaughter. So I really start to think about the world differently today and what kind of world is Riley going to have? And will she have kind of the same kind of social capabilities that we have? So, you think about the exploding population in the world today, and you think about a couple of principles like water is vital. We don't have water, we don't have life without water. And you think about what really differentiates communities. It's access to low-cost, reliable electricity. It's really what differentiates cities that are growing and blooming from decaying cities. And so to me, it's all about connecting the infrastructure, whether it's meters and edge devices like sensors, things to measure and inject renewables into our grid. It's things like being able to make sure that all of the water we manufacture, if you think about it, water we manufacture, we all think that it's free and that it's a God-given right, but we have to pay a lot of money to manufacture water and to deliver that water. Well, in the United States, which is the most efficient economy in the world around delivering water, 35% of the water that we manufacture never gets delivered to anybody or to any of us. So think about the loss, the inefficiency in that. Think about the cost in that, the cost to all of us. So the more we can interconnect, I think we would, in fact, leave the world, better for my granddaughter at least. So.
One comment I make about the water is, not most people don't know this, but the average household uses more water in the creation of their electricity than water consumption itself.
Yep.
It's just like mind-blowing when you think about that.
Yeah.
Let's hear a little bit from Lyndon. When you look at the question of intelligent infrastructure, what is the opportunity for solar in that context? And in particular, we're talking about integrating things, so rather than being just in the silo of energy, perhaps even connecting it to mobility. How do you see that happening? And what's the biggest obstacle you feel you have to overcome?
With the existing infrastructure, the way electricity is generated is you have a big centralized power plant, you transport that electricity for hundreds of miles and you deliver to some home or some business. Initially that was efficient because it was very expensive to create electricity, so you get economies of scale by having a large utility infrastructure. Well, technology has evolved to a point now where you can actually create the electricity at the place where it's needed. So our business model is we install solar systems for free and sell the electricity at a lower price than you can buy from the utility. So it is cheaper to buy local generation electricity than it is to buy from centralized locations, because transmission and distribution is 2/3 of the cost. So then you fast forward and you go, okay, how does the grid eventually become truly smart? I mean, there's been a big controversy on smart meters or a smart grid. And when they say smart grid, it means you can meter it remotely. That to me is not like really smart. That's just a little smarter than when it was. Smart is where you have a grid where you have local generation that generates electricity at the place where it's needed. Any excess, then the grid manager can take that excess energy and deliver to someone else who may be your next door neighbor. But eventually the grid needs to go, instead of one-way delivery, it needs to have delivery in both ways. So local delivery and centralized delivery.
So in a sense, we're talking about now grid-connected micropower with multi-directional flows and with smart management, sensors, real-time meters that can manage this power as appropriate. This is the vision for the much smarter grid, as I understand.
Exactly, and just to get to a point where you're going to have storage devices become more cost-effective. So with the evolution of cell phones and then now with electric vehicles, there's a tremendous amount of innovation occurring in reducing the cost of batteries. You look at the battery cost 4 or 5 years from now, which is not so far away. In terms of your energy lifetime, 4 or 5 out of 100 years is not much. You're going to have local storage that's cost-effective. So now you can have solar production that's excess can go into the storage. You then need to have a grid administrator that can essentially have access to all these devices, release the power whenever they want it, and control it all. This is not that hard to do. Then it gets back to your other point, is what's the obstacle? So the obstacle that we are seeing is that when you have an industry that is 100 years old and hasn't needed to change, has never had competition, nothing can force innovation at a greater level than competition, not even close. So when you don't have competition, what is your innovation level? It's tiny. So now when you have a 100-year-old monopoly that's preventing, that sees this disruptive change, this business model is going to be changing, the old way of doing things is going to change, and they're going to do whatever they can to slow that down or prevent it.
I share his views on this, but I got to make a couple comments. I agree with his comments about the monopoly and that our electricity system hasn't changed in 100 years. It looks exactly the same way it did 100 plus years ago. But I don't think that the average utility executive, there are some of them out there, but I don't think the average utility executive sits around and says, I love my monopoly and I don't want to change. I think our regulatory model is broken because it doesn't incent them. In fact, it incents them to put money into capital rate base. It doesn't incent them to change. And yet, our consumers, us, are not very well educated about that. And so there's a real danger there that, in fact, we get excited about, you're right, damn it, we should build microgrids everywhere and do solar and all kinds of renewables, and we're just going to break up the utility monopoly. That's wonderful, but expect that your little grid will be your little neighborhood, and when the power goes out, it goes out, and you won't be able to buy any from, the Northwest. We ship you guys lots of power. Or when the clouds come in on a sunny day on solar, you won't have access to storage because there won't be any way to innovate. You're absolutely right. It's got to be innovation that'll spark it, and it's got to be incented, and it's really all of us that'll change it, working with our regulators, but we have to become more educated about how this is all interconnected.
Absolutely. On the parking side, people have never thought about parking ever in transportation, but parking is the number one determinant of whether you're going to drive or not to your destination. And having the amount of supply of parking determines what people will do. So we put in smart sensors in the ground that basically show when people are going to park and the availability. Basically, it's all open source, it's all open code, and we had another group develop the app for us, etc. And that's one way we're basically saying this is all open source infrastructure. We got a federal grant. So we're applying this technology, this idea of open source technology now and testing to bicycles. We're starting a bike share program this August. We're starting all these different mobility test programs, and we're asking companies to come in and play.
I think California should be proud because I think you actually are kind of leading the world with respect to this. So when I said, to me, a smart city is about everything being connected, that's exactly what I mean. All the assets that the cities, governments, communities own in the world, they can very easily all be interconnected through the use of open protocol, open source, open standards, and then use our iPhones, which is how we all want to interact with the world these days. So
the challenge with this, though, is accountability.
Yeah.
Because now everything's open and available. That pothole is really obvious. It's a red light blinking now at that street. Yeah. That bus stop sign's got a broken light. That's flashing now on the sensor. It's on an open source website. It's an open countdown clock. We have to respond. Yeah. And we may not have the budget to respond. Whereas before, when it was all closed source,
but there's no problems.
There's no problems. Don't worry about it. Look at this. Look over here. So that's a issue. Not an issue, but it's a real obvious thing.
It's a cultural issue too, right? Because if you were to take that to Europe, they have a little different social model than we do. They would look at that taxes, red light, and there are communities where they'd say that's my responsibility. Right. There are things this interconnected world could enable all of us to take a little bit more responsibility and not depend on, the government or city hall to take care of us. Everybody talks about big data. So I think the real trick for government is we're going to have, especially if we interconnect everything, we're going to have so much access to data. It's not going to be about data. It's going to be about information. Pretty soon it's not going to be about information. It's going to be about knowledge and action. And so we need to enable this developer app world to get access to that data and actually take action so we can take some of the pressure off of government and let them do the real value add stuff.
Right. For us, what it really means is, especially in city government, making everything more transparent and more accountable is good for many, many reasons. It's what Linda was saying about competition. It's internalizing competition, basically, and internalizing accountability, which is not really the way of cities around the world, which is ironic. And because we don't have the resources to fix things all the time, we just don't physically have them, we're going to use that data, hopefully, to basically use it as an advocating platform so that we can advocate and say, look, if these things are important to you and you want them, then we need to pay for them. And this is what it's going to cost. And let the citizens basically decide on what's the most important thing to fix and how we're going to fund it. And then let's have those hard discussions about things like fees and taxes and to actually put it to these things. Because one thing people hate more than taxes is potholes. So, how do we actually get that connection going so we can figure that out? The more mobile we get in terms of our interaction, the more human interaction we need. I think we're just social animals by design. And my organization, another organization I worked for, went through this no work travel, only teleconferencing, and it just didn't work. And then people want to have face-to-face interaction. So cities are becoming much more attractive. The job is the attractor because you can work anywhere with your job now, but the city is the attractor because of all the non-job things, the cultural, civic, social, all those different things. That's what's exciting about being in cities.
Unless you're starting a city in the middle of the jungle, like Brasilia in Brazil, which was a disaster.
Look how well that went.
Right. You're going to have legacy assets. You're dealing with cities, places where people have come for historical reasons, geographic reasons, commercial reasons, and a city inherits its bones, right? So it's not as though you're starting with nothing.
Although I'll say that, China, India, and in your territories in Asia, I mean, they are building brand new cities from scratch, and they're going to build a lot more of them. What's alarming to me is that they're still looking at this US-centric model as the sign of status. And yet it depends who's the consultancy firm. If they're a Euro-centric consultancy firm, it tends to look more like the newer parts of Europe. If it's a US-centric design firm, it looks more like the newer parts of the US. And we need to break that apart and let the Asian region figure out what it wants for itself.
Is the new colonialism?
I think so. Maybe it's something like that. So it's the ideal. I remember when I did a little work project in Mumbai, and I was showing this new part of Mumbai, and they said, "Don't you love it? It's amazing. It's so high tech." It looked like South Orange County, and I was like, "That's not where we want to go." But for them, that was like status because that looked like Silicon Valley as well, and so that's not where we want to go. We want to go more like downtown Mumbai because that's actually really cool.
We're involved in a very large-scale water project in Mumbai. And what we're really doing there is we're bringing water to parts of Mumbai that have never had it before on a reliable basis, which means infrastructure, building out infrastructure, lots of money associated with that. So you have to work with entities like the World Bank. Around social media, I mean, all those people, even though they didn't have water or they may not have electricity, they all have a cell phone. Mm-hmm. They're actually implementing metering technology and communications technology, and they're putting apps out there. Now, that sounds crazy because these are people who can't afford to have 3 meals a day. But you know what? They have that phone, and it'll enable them to be able to buy water, kind of prepay water, and say, you know what? I'm going to buy this much water, and they'll get a message when the water's running out. You have the same capability on the electric side. It sort of changes the whole social aspect of water and says if you want water, it's sort of not your God-given right, but you have access to water. It's your responsibility, back to your earlier point, to manage that, not mine as city government or local government.
We were talking about Mumbai right now, but I mean, Mumbai's average water consumption is negligible compared to the Western world. I mean, I really don't want us to focus on the developing world as that we've got to fix that stuff. It's like we've got to fix ourselves.
Right.
And for us in the Western world, we need to really focus on conservation, efficiency, and social media comes in with gamification. We're starting to play with games. So people will not respond to, don't eat red meat, don't do this, don't do that, right? But they respond to, hey, if your group, your neighborhood, your team meets these goals, you get a credit for whatever you like, Starbucks, whatever it is, right? So these games that we're starting to play with on conservation and efficiency are starting to show a lot of dividends in terms of people's uptake, because we love playing games. Games are fun and the competition's kind of cool, but you're also starting to meet these social, environmental objectives that when you throw up a billboard saying, don't drive your car, people just glaze over it.
This was a great workshop. Thank you all for participating so energetically. Give our panel a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.